In the winter of 1887, railroad workers in Nevada's remote desert unearthed 97 female skeletons beneath the ruins of the Golden Rose Saloon. Each victim showed identical signs of violence. The official territorial report was immediately sealed after 3 investigating officers requested transfers, unable to cope with what they'd witnessed. For over a century, this mass grave remained unexplained, until recently discovered documents revealed the truth about 4 sisters who operated the most systematic murder enterprise in American frontier history. Before we continue with the story of the Everhart Sisters, make sure to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments what state you're listening from, because this tale proves that the most terrifying monsters weren't supernatural beings, but ordinary people capable of extraordinary evil. What makes this case even more chilling is how the 4 Everhart sisters managed to operate for nearly 10 years without suspicion, using the lawless nature of frontier society and the systematic corruption of local officials to mask their crimes in plain sight while accumulating a fortune that would be worth millions in today's currency. Silver Creek, Nevada, emerged from nothing in 1868 when prospector Jacob Steinberg discovered a rich silver vein in the barren hills 40 miles southeast of Carson City. The discovery occurred during one of the region's rare winter storms, when Steinberg sought shelter in a shallow cave and noticed glittering deposits in the rock walls. Within months of filing his claim, what began as a handful of canvas tents and crude wooden shanties transformed into a bustling mining town of nearly 4,000 souls, mostly men seeking fortune in the unforgiving Nevada desert, where summer temperatures regularly exceeded 100 degrees and winter nights could drop below freezing. By 1870, Silver Creek had evolved into one of Nevada's most prosperous mining communities, with the Silver Dollar Mine producing thousands of ounces of precious metal monthly and supporting a complex network of businesses, services, and entertainment establishments. The town's isolation worked to its advantage during the silver boom, as the nearest law enforcement sat a full day's hard ride away through treacherous mountain passes, and territorial officials rarely ventured into the harsh landscape unless absolutely necessary. This remoteness created a perfect environment for those seeking to operate outside the boundaries of conventional law and morality. The Silver Dollar Mine, which gave the town its economic foundation, operated around the clock with 3 shifts of workers descending into tunnels that eventually reached depths of over 600 feet below ground. The constant noise of mining equipment, the acrid smell of blasting powder, and the choking dust that perpetually hung in the air created an atmosphere where unusual sounds or odors from other sources could easily be masked or dismissed. The mine employed over 800 workers at its peak, creating a steady demand for housing, food, entertainment, and other services that made Silver Creek one of the most economically vibrant communities in the territory. The community that sprouted around Steinberg's mine reflected the rough-and-tumble nature of frontier life, but with an unusual degree of organization and sophistication that would later prove significant to our story. Main Street stretched for nearly 3/4 of a mile, lined with wooden buildings that ranged from hastily constructed saloons to substantial structures housing the town's essential businesses. The Silver Creek General Store, owned by German immigrant Heinrich Müller, served as the unofficial town center where news, gossip, and rumors circulated with equal intensity. Müller's establishment also functioned as the informal post office, bank, and message center, roles that would later prove crucial in tracking the mysterious disappearances that plagued the community. The town's demographics created a unique social structure that the Everhart sisters would later exploit with deadly efficiency. Men outnumbered women by a ratio of nearly 30-to-1, creating intense competition for female companionship and making women's businesses extremely profitable. The few respectable women in town, mostly wives of mine foremen, the schoolteacher Miss Catherine Pemberton, 2 seamstresses, a handful of shopkeepers' wives, and the occasional female relative visiting from back east, were treated with exaggerated courtesy and protection. This reverent attitude toward respectable women would later provide perfect cover for the sisters' operation, as community members were reluctant to question the activities of women who appeared to uphold moral standards in a town where such standards were often ignored. Into this harsh but prosperous environment came the four Everhart sisters in the spring of 1870, arriving on the weekly supply wagon from Carson City during the first week of May, when desert wildflowers briefly transformed the landscape into a carpet of yellow and purple blooms. The sisters, Greta aged 32, Wilhelmina aged 30, Margot aged 28, and Adelaide aged 25, carried only several worn leather trunks and a leather satchel containing what they claimed were letters of introduction from Carson City businessmen who had recommended Silver Creek as a promising location for establishing a boarding house and hospitality establishment for RESP. Respectable working women. Greta, the eldest and obvious leader of the group, possessed striking auburn hair that she wore pinned in the elaborate style fashionable among educated Eastern women, and piercing green eyes that seemed to evaluate everyone she met with unsettling intensity. Standing nearly 5 feet 8 inches tall, unusually tall for women of that era, she commanded attention whenever she entered a room. Those who encountered her described a woman of exceptional intelligence who spoke with the refined accent of someone educated back east, possibly in Philadelphia or Boston, though she remained deliberately vague about their background when questioned. Her hands, which she kept carefully gloved even in the desert heat, bore no calluses or other signs of manual labor, suggesting a privileged upbringing that made their presence in a rough mining town all the more mysterious. Wilhelmina, the second eldest, served as the group's financial administrator and record keeper. She possessed pale blonde hair and sharp blue eyes that missed no detail of any transaction or conversation. While initially appearing more reserved than her dominant older sister, careful observers noted that Wilhelmina's quiet demeanor masked a calculating intelligence that made her equally formidable in business dealings. She carried herself with the precision of someone accustomed to managing complex financial arrangements and maintaining detailed records. Margot, the third sister, handled much of the group's correspondence and public relations. She possessed dark brown hair and warm hazel eyes that created an impression of approachability and trustworthiness, qualities that would prove essential in attracting unsuspecting victims to their establishment. Her manner was engaging and sympathetic, making her particularly effective at gaining the confidence of young women seeking employment or assistance. She spoke with genuine seeming concern about the difficulties faced by women trying to make their way on the frontier, a persona that masked her true predatory nature. Adelaide, the youngest, appeared the most conventionally attractive of the four sisters, with golden blonde hair and cornflower blue eyes that initially endeared her to the town's male population. Her beauty and apparent innocence made her invaluable for maintaining the establishment's respectable facade and for managing the more delicate aspects of their criminal enterprise. Despite her youthful appearance, she possessed a steel-hard determination that became evident to anyone who crossed her wishes or threatened the sisters' operations. The sisters rented a large 3-story building at the end of Main Street that had previously housed Herman Goldstein's failed mercantile establishment. The building, constructed of sturdy pine with a stone foundation that extended deeper underground than most structures in town, offered over 5,000 square feet of space across 3 floors, plus an extensive basement area that Goldstein had excavated for storing merchandise during the building's original construction. The sisters paid a full year's rent in advance, an unusual practice that impressed their landlord, merchant banker Samuel Rothschild, who noted in his business diary that few tenants possessed such financial resources or confidence in their business prospects. Within 2 months, they had transformed the space into what they called the Golden Rose, ostensibly a boarding house and restaurant that catered to the town's small but growing population of women. The transformation required considerable expense and effort, including the purchase of furniture, linens, kitchen equipment, and decorative items that created an atmosphere of refinement rarely seen in Silver Creek. The sisters imported lace curtains from San Francisco, purchased 2 pianos from failing hotels in Virginia City and Carson City, acquired a substantial collection of books that they arranged in an impressive library for their guests' entertainment, and even installed gaslights throughout the building, a luxury that few establishments in Silver Creek could afford. The first floor served as a restaurant and social area for respectable female guests, including the wives of successful mine foremen like Martha Kowalski and Sarah O'Brien, the town's school teacher Miss Catherine Pemberton, 2 seamstresses who served the community's modest population of women, several shopkeepers' wives, and the occasional female relative visiting from back east. The establishment quickly gained a reputation for cleanliness, excellent food, reasonable prices, and refined conversation, a stark contrast to the rough accommodations available elsewhere in Silver Creek, where travelers typically slept in shared rooms above saloons or in crude boarding houses that offered little more than a bed and basic shelter. However, observant residents soon noticed that the Golden Rose served multiple purposes that would become central to understanding the sisters' eventual crimes. The building's second floor, accessible through a separate entrance on the side street that faced away from the main thoroughfare, operated as Silver Creek's most upscale brothel. Unlike the crude establishments that dotted the main street with their painted signs and gaudy decorations, the Golden Rose's second-floor operation maintained an atmosphere of discretion and luxury that attracted the town's most sophisticated and wealthy clientele. The upstairs establishment featured 10 elegantly appointed rooms, each furnished with quality furniture imported from San Francisco, thick carpets, silk wallpapers, crystal lamps, and amenities like private wash basins, mirrors, and even small libraries, luxuries that seemed impossible to obtain in such a remote location. The sisters had somehow acquired classical artwork, quality musical instruments, and even a collection of fine wines and spirits that created an ambiance more suited to a high-class establishment in San Francisco or Denver than a desert mining town. The third floor, which the sisters claimed was reserved for their private living quarters, actually served as temporary housing for women who had responded to their employment advertisements but had not yet been assigned permanent roles within the establishment. This floor would later prove central to understanding how the sisters managed to control and eventually eliminate their victims without arousing immediate suspicion from other residents or guests. The first documented disappearance occurred in late August 1870, just 3 months after the Everhart sisters' arrival in Silver Creek, during the week when desert temperatures finally dropped below 90 degrees for the first time since early June. Maria Fernandez, a 19-year-old girl from a struggling Mexican-American family in Carson City, had come to work at the Golden Rose after responding to an advertisement seeking young women of good character for domestic service in a respectable establishment offering steady wages, comfortable accommodations, and opportunities for advancement. Maria's journey to Silver Creek had been motivated by desperate family circumstances that would later prove typical of the sisters' preferred victims. Her father, Diego Fernandez, worked as a day laborer when construction jobs were available, but steady employment remained scarce in Carson City's competitive labor market, where anti-Mexican prejudice often prevented Hispanic workers from securing stable positions. Her mother, Elena, suffered from a persistent cough that had worsened throughout the summer, requiring expensive medicine that the family could barely afford even when Diego found work. Maria's 4 younger siblings, 3 brothers aged 8, 12, and 14, and a sister aged 10, depended on whatever income Maria could contribute to the household's survival. The advertisement that attracted Maria had appeared in the Carson City Daily Appeal on July 20, 1870, positioned prominently on the second page among notices for various employment opportunities. The carefully worded text, composed by Margot Everhart, who specialized in crafting appealing recruitment materials, promised steady employment for industrious young ladies of good character. Domestic service in respectable boarding house in prosperous mining community. Room, board, and competitive wages provided. Excellent opportunity for reliable workers seeking stable employment and personal advancement. References required. Apply in writing to Miss M. Everhart, Silver Creek, Nevada Territory. Maria's letter of application, later found among the sisters' possessions during the investigation, revealed both her desperation and her genuine qualifications for domestic work. Written in careful Spanish with an English translation provided by Father Miguel Santos, the local priest who assisted immigrant families with correspondence, the letter described her experience helping to manage her family's household, her ability to cook traditional Mexican dishes as well as American meals, her skills in cleaning and performing various domestic tasks, and her eagerness to work hard in exchange for the opportunity to send money home to support her ailing mother and younger siblings. Margot's response, dated August 1, 1870, exemplified the careful manipulation the sisters used to attract and control their victims. The letter expressed satisfaction with Maria's qualifications and invited her to begin employment immediately, explaining that a comfortable room had been prepared for her on the 3rd floor and that she could expect to earn $4 per week plus room and board. Wages that seemed extraordinarily generous compared to the limited opportunities available to young Mexican-American women in cars. On City, where domestic workers typically earned less than $2 per week with far less comfortable accommodations. The letter also included detailed instructions for reaching Silver Creek, assured Maria that she would be met at Heinrich Müller's general store upon her arrival, and emphasized the respectability of the establishment and the safety she could expect as an employee of such a well-regarded business. Most importantly, the letter requested detailed information about Maria's family situation, including their financial circumstances, her father's employment prospects, the health of family members, and whether anyone in Carson City would be expecting regular communication from her. Maria's letters home during her first month at the Golden Rose revealed both her initial satisfaction with her new position and subtle signs of the manipulation that would eventually seal her fate. Her first letter, dated August 15, 1870, expressed gratitude for the clean, comfortable room she had been given on the 3rd floor and praised the kindness of the 4 Everhart sisters, whom she described as refined ladies who treat their employees with consideration and respect rarely shown to Mexican girls in other establishments. She mentioned that her duties included cleaning, cooking, and serving meals to the boarding house's female guests, work that seemed appropriate and not overly demanding compared to the harsh labor she had expected. However, her subsequent letters contained hints of confusion and unease that would later prove significant to investigators attempting to reconstruct the sisters' methods. Maria wrote that Adelaide had asked extensive questions about her family's circumstances, including their financial situation, her father's employment prospects, her mother's medical condition, and whether anyone in Carson City would be expecting regular communication from her. While Adelaide claimed this information was necessary for employment records and to ensure Maria's welfare, the questioning seemed unusually thorough and personal for a domestic service position. More troubling, Maria's 3rd letter, dated September 2, 1870, described increasing restrictions on her movements and communication that seemed increasingly unusual for an employee in good standing. She explained that Wilhelmina had asked her to limit her correspondence with family to once every 2 weeks, claiming that frequent letter writing interfered with her work duties and created unnecessary postal expenses. She also mentioned that she had been moved from her original comfortable room on the 3rd floor to a smaller, windowless room in the basement, supposedly to make space for a new guest, though Maria had seen no evidence of additional boarders requiring accommodation. Most ominously, Maria's final letter, dated September 12, 1870, mentioned strange sounds during nighttime hours that seemed to come from other parts of the basement, sounds that Adelaide dismissed as rats or settling wood when Maria inquired about them. She also wrote about meeting two other young women who were supposedly fellow employees, but whom she was instructed not to speak with directly, as they were being trained for specialized duties that required complete concentration and isolation from distractions. Maria's letters stopped abruptly after September 12th, a silence that initially caused little concern for her family, who assumed she was simply busy with her new responsibilities and following the sisters' instructions about limiting correspondence. The sisters had established a pattern of gradually isolating their victims from family contacts before implementing their final plans, using seemingly reasonable explanations to justify reduced communication while gathering the information they would later need to fabricate convincing explanations for sudden departures. When Maria's worried father, Diego Fernandez, made the difficult and expensive journey to Silver Creek in early October, traveling by wagon over rough mountain roads that required 3 days of uncomfortable travel and consumed most of his limited savings, he found the four Everhart sisters sympathetic but unhelpful. Greta, speaking through Heinrich Müller, who served as translator, explained that Maria had left suddenly during the previous week, claiming she had received word of an extraordinary opportunity in San Francisco, where a wealthy family had offered her a position as a personal maid with wages of $8 per week, an amount that seemed almost impossibly generous. She produced a hastily written note, allegedly in Maria's handwriting, thanking the sisters for their kindness, but explaining her need to depart immediately to take advantage of this unexpected opportunity. The note, written in English with several Spanish phrases interspersed, seemed to match Maria's writing style at first glance, though Diego noticed subtle differences that made him uncomfortable. The paper appeared to have been aged deliberately with coffee stains and exposure to heat, and the ink seemed different from that used in Maria's previous letters home. When Diego pressed for more details about her departure, the sisters' story contained numerous inconsistencies that became more apparent as he continued his questioning. They claimed Maria had left before dawn to avoid the desert heat, yet also insisted she had packed all her belongings and received her final wages, which would have required considerable time and noise that should have awakened other residents in the building's close quarters. Margot claimed to have personally said goodbye to Maria and wished her well in her new position, but couldn't provide specific details about the family that had supposedly hired her or the circumstances of their offer. The second disappearance followed a disturbingly similar pattern that would later be recognized as evidence of the sisters' systematic approach to selecting and eliminating their victims. In November 1870, Charlotte Weber, a 22-year-old German immigrant who had been working as a seamstress in Virginia City, arrived at the Golden Rose, seeking employment after responding to another carefully crafted advertisement that had appeared in German-language newspapers throughout Nevada and California. Charlotte's background exemplified the vulnerable circumstances that made women ideal targets for the sisters' operation. She had arrived in America 18 months earlier as part of a large group of German immigrants seeking opportunities in the American West. But her journey had been marked by tragedy and isolation that left her without the family connections that might have protected her from predators. Her parents and younger brother had died during the Atlantic crossing, victims of the cholera epidemic that swept through their ship's overcrowded steerage compartments, leaving Charlotte alone in a strange country where she spoke limited English and knew no one. Her exceptional skill with needle and thread had enabled her to find work in Virginia City, where she specialized in creating and repairing the elaborate dresses favored by the wives of successful miners and businessmen. However, the economic downturn that began in late 1870 had reduced demand for luxury goods, and Charlotte found herself competing with several other seamstresses for an increasingly limited number of customers. The advertisement for domestic work at the Golden Rose appeared at a time when Charlotte was facing eviction from her small room above a dry goods store and desperately needed steady employment to avoid complete destitution. Throughout 1871 and 1872, a disturbing pattern emerged that would later horrify investigators who finally pieced together the sisters' methodology. Young women continued to arrive at the Golden Rose in increasing numbers, drawn by advertisements promising respectable employment and fair wages that appeared in newspapers throughout Nevada, California, Colorado, Utah, and other Western territories where economic hardship created pools of vulnerable women seeking opportunities for stable employment and financial security. The four sisters had developed an exceptionally sophisticated recruitment system that exploited the desperate circumstances of women on the American frontier while minimizing the risk of detection through careful victim selection and systematic elimination of potential witnesses. Each sister specialized in different aspects of the operation. Greta handled overall strategy and corruption of local officials. Wilhelmina managed financial records and disposal of stolen property. Margot controlled recruitment and correspondence with potential victims. And Adelaide supervised the physical aspects of imprisonment and murder. Their advertisements appeared in newspapers throughout the Western Territories, always promising opportunities for industrious young ladies of good character, in language carefully crafted to appeal to women seeking respectable employment while remaining vague enough to avoid specific commitments that might create legal obligations or attract unwanted attention from authorities. The sisters maintained separate post office boxes in Carson City, Virginia City, Sacramento, Denver, and Salt Lake City to create the impression of a larger, more established organization with connections throughout the region. Margot's correspondence with potential recruits demonstrated the psychological sophistication that made their operation so devastatingly effective. Her letters emphasized the respectability of their establishment, the safety and comfort of their accommodations, the opportunity for reliable women to advance within their organization, and the sisters' understanding of the unique challenges faced by women trying to make their way in the difficult environment of the American frontier. She had developed different recruitment approaches for different types of victims: sympathetic appeals to family obligation for women supporting relatives, promises of education and refinement for those seeking social advancement, and offers of protection and security for those fleeing difficult circumstances. More sinisterly, Margot's initial correspondence requested detailed information about each applicant's family situation, financial circumstances, local connections, language skills, and educational background. Information that would later prove crucial in determining who could disappear without triggering unwanted attention from family members or law enforcement. Women with large families, steady employment histories, strong community ties, or connections to influential people rarely received responses to their inquiries, while those whose backgrounds suggested isolation, desperation, or vulnerability were eagerly invited to begin employment immediately. The sisters' method of operation became increasingly refined over time as they learned from each successful crime and identified ways to reduce risk while maximizing profit from their expanding criminal enterprise. New arrivals were initially treated with apparent kindness and consideration, given comfortable accommodations in rooms on the building's third floor, and assigned light duties around the boarding house that seemed appropriate for domestic servants. This period of apparent contentment served multiple purposes. It allowed the sisters to evaluate each woman's potential value, both as a temporary employee and as an ultimate victim, while also establishing a pattern of happiness and satisfaction that could be referenced in fabricated farewell letters. During this evaluation period, which typically lasted between 2 and 8 weeks depending on various factors, including the victim's family connections and the sisters' current capacity for managing multiple simultaneous operations, the sisters gathered extensive information about each woman's background, family relationships, writing style, personal habits, fears, dreams, and financial resources. They encouraged their new employees to share stories about their past, their hopes for the future, and their concerns about their current circumstances, presenting themselves as sympathetic listeners who understood the challenges faced by young women trying to make their way in the difficult environment of the American frontier. This information would later be used to craft believable explanations for sudden departures and to forge convincing farewell messages that would satisfy family members' concerns without triggering investigations. The sisters maintained detailed psychological profiles of each victim in Wilhelmina's carefully organized records, documenting handwriting samples, vocabulary preferences, personal concerns, family relationships, and other details that enabled them to create authentic-seeming communications long after their victims had been murdered. The most chilling aspect of the sisters' operation was their patience and systematic approach to each phase of their crimes. They rarely acted immediately upon a woman's arrival, instead waiting weeks or even months before implementing their final plans. This delay served several crucial purposes. It allowed any initial family concerns to subside, as regular letters established a pattern of communication and apparent contentment, created the impression of established employment that made sudden departures seem more plausible, gave the sisters time to fully understand each victim's personality and circumstances, and enabled them to coordinate multiple simultaneous operations without overwhelming their capacity to maintain control and avoid detection. By 1873, the Golden Rose had become Silver Creek's most respected women's establishment, with a reputation for providing safe, comfortable accommodations and employment opportunities for women from throughout the Western Territories. Local residents had grown accustomed to the steady stream of young women who arrived seeking work and the equally steady departure of employees who supposedly left for better opportunities elsewhere. The constant westward migration of the era made such explanations entirely believable, as young women frequently moved between towns and territories in search of better circumstances or following family members who had relocated for work or health reasons. Sheriff Caleb Harrison, when occasionally pressed about missing persons reports from concerned family members, showed remarkable disinterest in investigating the disappearances that seemed to cluster around the Golden Rose. Years later, investigators would discover that Harrison had been a regular customer of the Golden Rose's upstairs establishment and had received frequent gifts from the Everhart Sisters, including cash payments that far exceeded his modest salary, expensive whiskey and cigars that he could never have afforded on his official income, and other considerations that ensured his cooperation in dismissing concerns about missing women. Harrison's willingness to dismiss concerns about missing women as the natural result of frontier mobility proved crucial to the sisters' continued operations. When family members like Diego Fernandez attempted to file formal complaints or request investigations, Harrison would explain that young women frequently left mining towns for better opportunities elsewhere, particularly immigrants who often moved between communities following seasonal work or family obligations. His official reports, when he bothered to file them at all, invariably concluded that missing women had departed voluntarily for personal reasons and that no criminal activity was suspected. The sisters had also cultivated relationships with other key figures in Silver Creek's power structure, ensuring that potential threats to their operation would be neutralized before they could develop into serious problems. Heinrich Möller, the general store owner who controlled much of the town's commercial activity and informal communication networks, received regular orders for expensive imported goods that the sisters purchased for the Golden Rose's operations. These transactions, which generated substantial profits for Möller's business, created a financial incentive for him to support the sisters' reputation as successful businesswomen rather than investigate inconsistencies in their stories about departing employees. Dr. Elias Hoffman, Silver Creek's only physician, had developed a particularly troubling relationship with the four Everhart sisters that would later draw intense scrutiny from investigators. Hoffman, a middle-aged man whose medical license had been revoked in Pennsylvania under mysterious circumstances involving the suspicious deaths of several female patients, had arrived in Silver Creek shortly after the sisters and quickly became one of their most trusted associates. His past professional troubles, which included allegations of performing illegal abortions, providing narcotics to individuals without legitimate medical need, and conducting unauthorized medical experiments on vulnerable patients, made him vulnerable to blackmail and eager to maintain his position as the town's only medical authority. By 1874, the Everhart sisters had refined their operation into what can only be described as a systematic killing enterprise that operated with the efficiency of a legitimate business while generating enormous profits through the systematic murder of vulnerable women. Their success stemmed from their ability to maintain multiple distinct reputations within Silver Creek's community. The sisters continued to be regarded as respectable businesswomen and valuable community members, while their careful management of information and systematic corruption of local officials ensured that troubling questions about their activities were consistently dismissed or suppressed. The sisters had also developed an extensive network of accomplices and business partners, though most remained unaware of the full extent of their crimes. Tom Brennan, a former convict who worked as a handyman and general laborer, performed various tasks around the Golden Rose that required unusual discretion and physical strength. Brennan, a massive man with a violent past who had served time in territorial prison for assault and robbery, asked few questions about the odd jobs the sisters assigned him, which included digging what they claimed were new privies, storage cellars, and drainage systems, always during nighttime hours when other residents were unlikely to observe his activities. Samuel Garrett, a wagon driver who transported goods between Silver Creek and larger cities throughout the region, had developed a lucrative side business disposing of items that the sisters claimed were surplus property or belongings left behind by former employees. Garrett's regular routes enabled him to sell these items in distant markets where their origins would not be questioned, and his discretion was ensured through generous payments that supplemented his legitimate income. He never questioned why the sisters always had such large quantities of women's clothing, jewelry, and personal items to dispose of, or why they insisted on conducting these transactions in secrecy. The sisters' method of selecting victims had become increasingly calculated and sophisticated by this period. They focused on women who met specific criteria designed to minimize the risk of discovery, while maximizing the potential profit from each crime. Those with minimal family connections who could disappear without immediate notice, limited financial resources that made extensive searches unlikely, poor English skills or education that might make them more trusting of authority figures, backgrounds that made them unlikely to be missed quickly by law enforcement agencies, and personal circumstances that would make sudden departures seem plausible to anyone who inquired about their whereabouts. Mexican and Chinese immigrant women proved particularly vulnerable targets, as racial prejudices of the era meant their disappearances generated little concern from local authorities who viewed such women as transient and disposable. The sisters also targeted women fleeing abusive relationships, those with criminal backgrounds who might be reluctant to contact law enforcement, and individuals whose families lived in distant locations where communication was difficult and expensive. Letters from family members seeking information about missing women began to arrive more frequently at the Golden Rose as the sisters' operation expanded, but they had developed a comprehensive response system that consistently deflected suspicion while maintaining their reputation for helpfulness and concern. The sisters maintained a collection of sample handwriting from former employees, allowing them to forge believable farewell notes when necessary, and had created detailed backstories for the fictional opportunities and relationships that supposedly attracted their victims to leave Silver Creek. Wilhelmina's record-keeping had evolved into a sophisticated accounting system that treated human lives as business assets while tracking every aspect of their criminal enterprise. Her ledgers documented each victim's arrival date, personal information gathered during the evaluation period, estimated value of their possessions, the method and date of their murder, and the profits generated from selling their belongings. The records also included detailed notes about families' responses to missing persons reports, enabling the sisters to monitor the aftermath of each disappearance and take additional action if their explanations failed to satisfy concerned relatives. The physical evidence of their crimes accumulated in the building's extensively modified basement, which the sisters had gradually expanded through Tom Brennan's nighttime excavations and construction projects. What had begun as a simple storage area had evolved into a complex network of underground chambers that extended far beyond the building's original foundation, reaching under the adjacent alley and connecting to natural caves in the area's rocky substrate. The sisters claimed these expansions were necessary for storing supplies and accommodating the boarding house's growing business. But the subterranean layout suggested far more sinister purposes. The basement had been subdivided into multiple specialized areas that served different functions in the sisters' criminal operation. The main area contained storage rooms for victims' belongings, which were sorted and catalogued like merchandise in a warehouse, with valuable items separated for sale and personal mementos kept as trophies. Adjacent chambers had been equipped with heavy chains and restraints, soundproofing materials, and drainage systems that facilitated the imprisonment and murder of victims without alerting other residents to the activities taking place below ground. During this period, the sisters also began to diversify their criminal activities beyond simple murder for profit. They had developed elaborate blackmail schemes targeting their brothel's prominent clients, using Greta's intelligence and the sisters' collective attention to detail to gather compromising information about territorial officials, mine owners, railroad executives, and other influential men who could not afford public scandal. Adelaide's beauty and apparent innocence made her particularly effective at extracting secrets from clients who underestimated her intelligence and ambition. This blackmail operation provided the sisters with both additional income and crucial protection from law enforcement scrutiny. Sheriff Harrison's dismissive attitude toward missing persons reports became more understandable when investigators later discovered that the sisters possessed detailed records of his gambling debts, drinking problems, inappropriate relationships with several local women, and his regular visits to their establishment's upstairs rooms. Similar leverage existed over other officials who might otherwise have been inclined to investigate the growing number of disappearances associated with the Golden Rose. The sisters had also established connections with criminal networks in other territories, enabling them to expand their operations beyond Silver Creek while maintaining the appearance of operating a simple boarding house and restaurant. They maintained correspondence with individuals in San Francisco, Denver, Salt Lake City, and other western cities who assisted in disposing of stolen property, providing false documents for various fraudulent schemes, and recruiting additional victims who could be transported to Silver Creek under false pretenses. The sisters' carefully constructed operation began to show signs of strain in early 1876 when they made a critical error that would eventually lead to their downfall. The mistake came in the form of Rose McGillicuddy, a spirited 26-year-old Irish immigrant who had arrived in Silver Creek seeking employment after losing her position as a governess in Sacramento when her employer's family encountered financial difficulties during the economic depression that had affected much of California's mining industry. Rose possessed qualities that set her apart from the sisters' typical victims and should have disqualified her from consideration under their usual selection criteria. She was literate, assertive, well-educated, and maintained regular correspondence with a large extended family in Boston who would immediately notice if her letters stopped arriving. Her education, though not formal, was extensive enough to enable her to work as a governess for wealthy families, and her confidence in dealing with authority figures made her unlikely to accept restrictions or explanations that might seem suspicious to someone with less experience navigating complex social situations. More importantly, Rose came from a stable background with strong family connections that should have made her disappearance immediately noticeable to people who possessed the resources and motivation to demand thorough investigations. Her father, Patrick McGillicuddy, worked as a foreman at a textile mill in Boston and earned sufficient income to support his large family while maintaining regular communication with relatives throughout the American West. Her mother, Bridget, came from a family with connections to Boston's Irish political establishment, relationships that could potentially bring pressure on territorial and federal law enforcement agencies if Rose were to vanish under suspicious circumstances. Rose had responded to one of the sisters' advertisements that appeared in the Sacramento Daily Union on January 15, 1876, during a period when her employment prospects seemed particularly bleak due to the economic difficulties that affected many wealthy families throughout the West. The advertisement, composed by Margot using her most sophisticated recruitment language, promised exceptional opportunities for educated young women capable of domestic management, childcare responsibilities, and social instruction in a refined frontier establishment serving discerning clientele. Her letter of application, later recovered during the investigation, revealed both her qualifications and her family situation in detail that should have warned the sisters away from selecting her as a potential victim. Rose described her experience as a governess for 3 different families in California, her ability to teach children reading, writing, arithmetic, and social graces, her familiarity with household management responsibilities that enabled her to supervise other domestic workers, and her fluency in both English and Gaelic that made her valuable for working with immigrant families. More significantly, she mentioned her large family in Boston, her regular correspondence with relatives throughout the country, and her plans to eventually return east when she had saved sufficient money to establish herself in business or marry respectably. However, the sisters' criminal enterprise had become so successful and profitable that they apparently grew overconfident in their ability to eliminate any woman who might threaten their operation, regardless of her background or connections. The steady stream of victims over nearly 6 years had created a sense of invulnerability that led them to take risks they might have avoided during their earlier, more cautious period of operation. Margot's response to Rose's application, dated February 1, 1876, eagerly invited her to begin employment immediately at wages of $6 per week, plus room and board. Compensation that was generous enough to overcome Rose's initial hesitation about traveling to such a remote location to work for employers she had never met. The letter emphasized the sisters' appreciation for educated women who could serve as role models for other employees and assist with the establishment's reputation for respectability and refinement. Within days of Rose's arrival at the Golden Rose in mid-February 1876, she began to notice disturbing patterns that previous victims had either missed or been unable to act upon due to their more vulnerable circumstances. Her education and confidence enabled her to observe details that less sophisticated women might have dismissed, and her family connections gave her both the motivation and ability to document her concerns in ways that could eventually reach law enforcement authorities. The building's layout included several rooms and areas that appeared to be permanently locked or restricted, despite the sisters' claims that they were used for storing supplies, seasonal equipment, or accommodating special guests who required privacy. When Rose offered to help with cleaning or organizing these storage areas, demonstrating the kind of initiative that had made her valuable as a governess, all 4 sisters became evasive and insisted that the rooms contained personal belongings or sensitive business materials that required no attention from employees. Strange sounds emanated from the basement during nighttime hours, not the typical creaking and settling noises of an old wooden building, but deliberate movements, muffled voices, and what sounded like construction work or excavation activities. The sounds typically began well after midnight and continued until dawn, suggesting activities that the sisters preferred to conduct when other residents were unlikely to be awake and observant. When Rose mentioned these disturbances during casual conversation, Adelaide became visibly nervous and claimed the sounds were caused by rats, desert animals, or the building's heating system, explanations that seemed implausible to someone with Rose's intelligence and experience. Most troubling, Rose discovered personal belongings hidden in various locations throughout the building that clearly belonged to other women who had supposedly left town for better opportunities elsewhere. These items were not simply forgotten possessions that might be expected when someone departed in haste, but valuable personal effects and sentimental items that no woman would voluntarily abandon. Jewelry with obvious family significance, religious items like crucifixes and prayer books with personal inscriptions, professional tools like sewing equipment and medical instruments, photographs of family members and letters from loved ones that revealed intimate family relationships and circumstances. Rose's letter to her sister Margaret, dated March 10, 1876, and later recovered by investigators, described her growing concerns with the detailed observations that would prove crucial in eventually exposing the sisters' crimes. The four Everhart sisters maintain an impressive facade of respectability and business success, but something feels terribly wrong about this place. I have found women's clothing and personal items hidden in closets and storage areas throughout the building, far more than could be explained by the occasional departures I have witnessed since my arrival. The sisters claim these belongings were left behind by former employees who departed suddenly for various opportunities, but the quantity and nature of these items suggest a much more troubling explanation. Rose continued, "Most disturbing is a collection of jewelry, family photographs, and personal mementos that no woman would willingly leave behind, including a silver locket containing photographs of children, sewing scissors with carved ivory handles that represent a substantial investment for any seamstress, a German prayer book with a woman's name inscribed inside the cover, and letters from family members expressing concern about not hearing from their daughters or sisters. I have counted belongings from at least 20 different women, yet I have been told of only 3 departures during my time here. More damaging to the sisters' operation, Rose possessed the education and confidence to ask direct questions about inconsistencies she observed, questions that previous victims had either been too intimidated or too isolated to pursue effectively. When Greta claimed that a former employee named Sarah Jenkins had left suddenly for Denver to marry a wealthy merchant she had met through correspondence, Rose pointed out that Sarah's best dress remained hanging in her former room. Her life savings were still hidden beneath her mattress, and her most treasured possession, a gold cross that had belonged to her deceased mother, was still hanging on a nail beside her bed. Sarah had confided to Rose about these savings during their brief acquaintance, explaining that she planned to use the money to bring her younger sister west from Missouri once she had established herself in stable employment. She had also spoken about the gold cross with deep emotion, describing how her mother had given it to her on her deathbed and made Sarah promise never to part with it. The idea that Sarah would abandon both her carefully hoarded savings and her most precious family heirloom seemed impossible to anyone who had known her personally. Greta's explanation that Sarah had been so excited about her sudden romantic opportunity that she forgot her most valuable possessions in her haste to begin her new life struck Rose as not merely implausible, but deliberately deceptive. The explanation required believing that a careful, methodical woman like Sarah would abandon months of savings and her most treasured family heirloom because of romantic excitement, a scenario that contradicted everything Rose had observed about Sarah's personality and priorities. Rose's suspicions intensified when she discovered that Dr. Hoffman's nighttime visits to the building were far more frequent than would be necessary for treating occasional ailments among the residents or providing routine medical care for the establishment's various operations. Through careful observation from her third-floor room, which provided a clear view of the building's side entrance and the surrounding area, Rose documented a pattern of visits that occurred approximately 3 times per week, always between midnight and dawn, and always involving the doctor carrying his medical bag and additional equipment directly to the basement entrance rather than to patient rooms on the upper floors. When she questioned Wilhelmina about these visits, citing genuine concern for any fellow employees who might be seriously ill and offering to help with nursing care based on her experience caring for sick children during her governessing work, the sister became visibly agitated and provided contradictory explanations that revealed the sisters' growing difficulty in maintaining their deceptive cover stories. First, Wilhelmina claimed the doctor was treating a woman suffering from consumption who required isolation in the basement to prevent the disease from spreading to other residents. When Rose offered to help care for the patient, explaining that she had experienced nursing sick children and was not afraid of contagious diseases, Wilhelmina quickly changed her story, claiming the woman had recovered completely and departed for a sanitarium in Colorado, where she could receive specialized treatment. Later that same week, when Rose inquired about the apparent absence of any basement patient rooms during her daytime exploration of the building's lower level, Wilhelmina offered yet another explanation. Dr. Hoffman was treating women from the town's red light district who required discreet medical attention for delicate conditions that would be compromised by publicity or association with respectable establishments. This explanation seemed more plausible given the realities of frontier medicine and the social attitudes of the era, but Rose noticed that she never observed any women entering or leaving the building during the doctor's nighttime visits. The crisis point arrived when Rose's curiosity and growing suspicions led her to attempt a more thorough exploration of the building's basement area during the early morning hours of March 18, 1876. She had waited until the building had grown quiet, and she was confident that the sisters had retired to their private quarters before attempting to access the lower level through a door she had seen Dr. Hoffman use during his visits. The door, located behind the main staircase and partially concealed by stored furniture and supplies, appeared to lead to a different section of the basement than the area she had previously explored during her regular duties. What she discovered there would have sealed her fate immediately had she not possessed the presence of mind to retreat quickly and begin planning her escape from Silver Creek before the sisters realized the extent of her knowledge. Behind the concealed door lay a narrow staircase leading to a lower level that had been extensively excavated beyond the building's original foundation. The basement area had been subdivided into multiple small chambers, each equipped with heavy chains attached to the walls, iron rings embedded in the stone floor, and drainage systems that suggested purposes far more sinister than simple storage or accommodation. The stench of death and decay permeated the underground space, despite obvious attempts to mask the odors with lime, lye, and other chemicals that had been applied in quantities suggesting systematic efforts to conceal evidence over extended periods. The air was thick and oppressive, making breathing difficult and creating an atmosphere of horror that Rose would later describe as unlike anything she had ever experienced. In the largest chamber, Rose discovered physical evidence that left no doubt about the sisters' true activities. A vast collection of women's clothing, shoes, jewelry, and personal belongings that had been sorted and organized as if they were valuable merchandise awaiting sale. The items represented dozens of different women, far more than could be explained by the normal turnover of employees in even the busiest legitimate boarding house operation. Most horrifying were the personal mementos and family photographs that no woman would voluntarily abandon. Evidence of lives cut short for the sake of profit and greed. Just when we thought we'd seen it all, the horror in Silver Creek intensifies. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happens next in this tale of systematic murder on the American frontier. Rose also discovered detailed accounting ledgers that revealed the systematic nature of the sisters' operation and the shocking scope of their crimes over nearly 6 years of continuous activity. Written in Wilhelmina's careful handwriting, these records documented each victim's arrival date, personal information gathered during the evaluation period, estimated value of their possessions, and the date of their murder. The ledgers treated human lives as business transactions, recording profits from the sale of victims' belongings, expenses associated with disposing of bodies, and ongoing costs for maintaining their operation, including bribes to local officials and payments to accomplices throughout the region. Most chilling were the detailed notes about families' responses to missing persons reports, indicating that the sisters carefully monitored the aftermath of each disappearance to assess whether their explanations had been accepted or whether additional action might be necessary to prevent investigations. The records showed that they had successfully convinced most families that their daughters or sisters had departed voluntarily for better opportunities. but they also noted cases where persistent relatives had required additional attention, including bribes to local officials, more elaborate deceptions to maintain their cover stories, or in several cases, threats against family members who became too persistent in their inquiries. Rose's discovery included evidence of the sisters' expanding criminal network, which extended far beyond Silver Creek and involved accomplices in multiple states and territories. The ledgers contained correspondence with individuals in San Francisco, Denver, Salt Lake City, Portland, and other western cities who assisted in disposing of stolen property, providing false documents for various fraudulent schemes, or creating believable cover stories for the sisters' activities. This network enabled them to operate with a level of sophistication that would have been impossible for 4 isolated women in a remote mining town. The records also revealed that the sisters had been gradually expanding their operation, with plans to establish similar operations in other mining towns throughout the region. They had been using their accumulated wealth to purchase property and establish business connections in communities where they could replicate their Silver Creek success while maintaining their current operation as a source of ongoing income and a training ground for refining their methods. Rose's letter to her sister Margaret, dated March 19, 1876, and mailed from Carson City rather than Silver Creek, provided the first detailed account of what she had witnessed in the basement chambers. "I have discovered something so horrible that I dare not commit all the details to paper, lest this letter be intercepted before reaching you safely. The basement of this establishment contains chambers that serve no legitimate purpose, and I have seen evidence that the 4 sisters' explanations for departing employees are elaborate deceptions designed to conceal systematic murder on a scale that defies comprehension." Rose continued, "The scope of their crimes extends far beyond what anyone could imagine, involving dozens of women over several years and a network of accomplices that reaches across multiple territories. I have seen detailed records that treat human lives as business transactions, documenting each murder with the same precision that legitimate businesses apply to their commercial activities. I am leaving immediately and will provide full details to territorial authorities upon reaching safety, but I fear that many more women will die if immediate action is not taken to stop these monsters." Rose's escape from Silver Creek required careful planning and considerable courage, as she realized that any obvious departure would alert the sisters to her knowledge and potentially put her in immediate danger. She understood that her educated background and family connections, which should have protected her from becoming a victim, also made her a significant threat to the sisters' operation if they suspected she had discovered their secrets. Her ability to communicate effectively with law enforcement authorities and her family's resources for pursuing investigations made her elimination a priority if the sisters realized what she had learned. Instead of attempting to flee immediately, which might have aroused suspicion and prompted the sisters to take immediate action against her, Rose decided to create a plausible explanation for her departure that would allow her to escape while minimizing suspicion about her true motives. She claimed to have received word through Heinrich Müller's general store that her elderly grandmother in Boston had taken seriously ill and required her immediate attention to help manage family affairs and provide nursing care. To support this story, Rose asked Muller to send a telegram to her family requesting confirmation of her grandmother's condition, a message that actually served to alert her relatives about her dangerous situation while providing cover for her departure. She also fabricated evidence to support her cover story, including a telegram that she claimed to have received from her family, but had actually composed herself using her knowledge of her relatives' communication patterns and family circumstances. The telegram, which she showed to all 4 sisters to explain her sudden need to depart, requested her immediate return to Boston to help care for her grandmother and assist with urgent family business matters that required her personal attention. Rose's performance was convincing enough that the sisters appeared to accept her explanation, though their reaction differed markedly from their typical responses to employees who announced departures for personal reasons. Rather than the sympathetic concern they had shown when other women announced departures, all four sisters seemed agitated and suspicious, asking detailed questions about her grandmother's condition, her family's financial situation, her plans for returning to Silver Creek once her family obligations were resolved, and her intentions regarding the information she might share with others about her experiences at the Golden Rose. More tellingly, they insisted on examining Rose's belongings before her departure, claiming they wanted to ensure she hadn't accidentally packed items belonging to the Golden Rose or other employees. This search, conducted under the pretense of helpfulness and concern for the establishment's property, was clearly an attempt to determine whether Rose had discovered anything that could compromise their operation. They paid particular attention to her personal papers, including her correspondence, any notes she might have made during her stay, and her traveling money, searching for evidence that she had observed or documented suspicious activities. Rose McGillicuddy's escape and subsequent testimony to territorial authorities in Carson City triggered the investigation that would finally expose the full extent of the Everhart sisters' crimes. Her detailed account, supported by physical evidence she had managed to smuggle out of the Golden Rose hidden in her personal belongings, convinced Territorial Marshal James Hartwell to organize the most comprehensive criminal investigation in Nevada Territory's history. Hartwell, a former Union Army colonel who had served with distinction during the Civil War before accepting his territorial appointment, possessed both the experience and authority necessary to conduct a thorough investigation, despite the potential resistance from local officials who had been compromised by the sisters' operation. Rose's testimony, recorded in detailed depositions that later became central evidence in the sisters' trial, provided investigators with their first comprehensive understanding of the systematic nature of the murders and the sophisticated criminal organization that had operated undetected for nearly 6 years. She described the basement chambers she had discovered, the accounting ledgers that documented each victim with businesslike precision, the network of accomplices that enabled the sisters to operate across multiple territories, and the methods they used to select vulnerable women who could disappear without triggering immediate investigations. More importantly, Rose's account enabled investigators to understand how the sisters had maintained their operation for so many years without detection, despite repeated warnings from concerned family members and the obviously suspicious pattern of disappearances associated with their establishment. Her observations about the corruption of local officials, the exploitation of social prejudices that made certain women's disappearances less noticeable, and the sophisticated methods used to create believable explanations for sudden departures provided a comprehensive roadmap for understanding how such extensive crimes could occur in supposedly civilized communities. The investigation began in earnest on April 15, 1876, when Marshal Hartwell arrived in Silver Creek with a team of 12 deputies, 2 territorial judges authorized to issue warrants and conduct preliminary hearings, 3 physicians qualified to conduct forensic examinations of human remains, and a court stenographer to document all proceedings. The size and composition of the investigative team reflected both the seriousness of the allegations and the anticipated resistance from local officials who might attempt to obstruct the investigation to protect their own interests. The 4 sisters attempted to maintain their facade of innocent cooperation when the investigators arrived, but their nervous behavior and obvious attempts to prevent access to certain areas of the building immediately raised suspicions among the experienced lawmen. Greta, whose intelligence and composure had been crucial to their operation's success, seemed uncharacteristically flustered when presented with the comprehensive search warrant, asking repeated questions about its scope and attempting to negotiate limitations on the areas that could be examined and the materials that could be seized. Wilhelmina's reaction was even more telling, as she attempted to hide or destroy business records before the investigators could examine them, claiming that the documents contained sensitive financial information about their legitimate business operations that should be protected from public scrutiny. Her obvious panic when investigators demanded access to all records and correspondence suggested that she understood the incriminating nature of the materials they would discover. Margot and Adelaide attempted to maintain their usual charm and apparent innocence, but their nervous chatter and contradictory statements about the building's layout, the number of women currently employed at the establishment, and the purposes of various rooms created immediate suspicion among investigators who had been trained to recognize deceptive behavior. The basement revealed the true horror of the sisters' operation in ways that exceeded even Rose McGillicuddy's detailed descriptions. What the Everharts had claimed were storage areas and additional rooms for accommodating guests proved to be an extensive complex of chambers designed for imprisonment, torture, and systematic murder. The main basement area had been subdivided into multiple small rooms using stone walls and heavy wooden doors, equipped with locks that could only be operated from the outside, creating what amounted to underground prison cells. Each chamber contained evidence of its sinister purpose. Heavy chains and shackles attached to the walls and floors, drainage systems that had been installed to facilitate the disposal of blood and other bodily fluids, soundproofing materials including thick carpets and padded walls that would prevent screams from being heard by residents on the upper floors, and ventilation shafts that had been deliberately blocked to create suffocating conditions that too would accelerate victims' deaths. The stench of death permeated the underground space, despite obvious attempts to mask odors with lime, lye, and other chemicals that had been applied in quantities suggesting systematic efforts to conceal evidence over extended periods. The investigators, despite their military and law enforcement experience with violent crime, found the atmosphere so oppressive that they were forced to work in short shifts and provide medical attention to several team members who became physically ill during the initial examination. In the deepest chambers, which could only be accessed through concealed passages behind false walls, investigators discovered the physical evidence that would seal the sisters' fate. A vast collection of personal belongings taken from their victims, carefully catalogued and stored as if they were valuable merchandise awaiting sale. The items filled multiple rooms and represented the remnants of nearly 100 lives cut short by the sisters' systematic greed and cruelty. The collection included jewelry ranging from simple wedding rings to elaborate necklaces that suggested some victims had come from wealthy families, clothing sorted by size and quality for potential resale with careful notes about market values, professional tools like sewing equipment, medical instruments, and teaching materials that indicated the diverse backgrounds of the victims, religious items including crucifixes, prayer books, Jewish ritual objects, and Islamic prayer beads that demonstrated the broad range of women who had been targeted. And most heartbreakingly, personal mementos like family photographs, letters from loved ones, children's drawings, and keepsakes that represented the emotional connections that had been severed forever. More damning evidence emerged from the sisters' own records, which demonstrated the business-like precision with which they had approached mass murder over nearly 6 years of continuous operation. Wilhelmina's accounting ledgers, discovered hidden in multiple locations throughout the basement complex, revealed the full scope of their operation and provided investigators with detailed documentation of 97 individual murders. The ledgers documented each victim with the same attention to detail that legitimate businesses applied to their commercial transactions. Entries included each woman's name, age, background information, date of arrival at the Golden Rose, estimated value of their possessions, detailed notes about their family connections, and potential for being missed if they disappeared, the method and date of their murder, and comprehensive records of profits generated from selling their belongings through the sisters' network of accomplices. The accounting system also revealed the sisters' methods for selecting victims, with detailed notes about each woman's family situation, financial resources, language skills, education level, and likelihood of being missed if they disappeared. The records showed clear preferences for immigrants with limited English skills, women from impoverished backgrounds who lacked resources for extensive searches, individuals whose family connections were distant or complicated by geographic separation, and those whose personal circumstances made sudden departures seem plausible. Most chilling were the detailed notes about the murder methods employed, which had been refined over time to maximize efficiency while minimizing the risk of detection. The records described experiments with different poisons acquired through Dr. Hoffman's medical connections, techniques for restraining victims during the killing process to prevent noise or struggle, and methods for disposing of bodies that would prevent identification if remains were ever discovered by accident. The systematic nature of these entries suggested that the sisters viewed murder as a technical problem to be solved through careful research, experimentation, and continuous improvement of their methods. They had developed what amounted to an assembly line approach to killing, with each sister specializing in different aspects of the process to maximize efficiency and minimize the time required to eliminate each victim. The investigation also uncovered evidence of the sisters' extensive network of accomplices, which reached far beyond Silver Creek and involved individuals in multiple states and territories. Correspondence found among their possessions revealed connections to fences who specialized in disposing of victims' jewelry and valuable belongings in distant markets, document forgers who provided false papers for various fraudulent schemes, corrupt officials in other towns who facilitated the sisters' recruitment activities by recommending Silver Creek as a destination for women seeking employment, and even other criminal organizations that operated similar schemes in different regions. Dr. Elias Hoffman's role in the operation proved even more disturbing than investigators had initially suspected. His medical expertise had been crucial in developing killing methods that would not immediately be recognized as murder if bodies were discovered, and he had performed crude surgical procedures to remove identifying features from victims, making identification difficult if remains were ever uncovered by accident. His personal journals, discovered during a search of his residence, contained detailed notes about the physiological effects of various poisons, mechanical methods of causing death while minimizing obvious signs of violence, and techniques for accelerating decomposition of human remains. The investigation revealed that Tom Brennan's nighttime excavations had not been limited to expanding the basement for storage, as the sisters had claimed to local residents. He had dug an extensive network of burial sites in the desert surrounding Silver Creek, locations where the sisters disposed of their victims' remains after extracting maximum profit from their murders. These burial sites, identified through information found in the sisters' records and Hoffman's journals, were located in remote areas where the harsh desert conditions would accelerate decomposition and reduce the likelihood of accidental discovery. The scope of the physical evidence overwhelmed the territorial investigation team, requiring additional personnel and resources to properly document and analyze the materials recovered from the Golden Rose and its associated burial sites. The investigation ultimately required nearly 4 months to complete, involving dozens of personnel including law enforcement officers, medical examiners, court officials, and specialists in forensic techniques who worked to build the comprehensive case that would ensure the sisters' conviction and execution. The trial of Greta, Wilhelmina, Margot, and Adelaide Everhart began on September 20, 1876, in the Territorial Court in Carson City, presided over by Judge William Harrison, a distinguished jurist who had been specifically appointed to handle the case due to its unprecedented complexity and national significance. The proceedings attracted international attention from newspapers throughout the United States and Europe, as the systematic nature of their crimes and the large number of victims made their case one of the most shocking in world criminal history. Reporters from major newspapers in San Francisco, Denver, Chicago, New York, London, and Paris established temporary bureaus in Carson City to provide daily coverage of what was being called the Silver Creek Massacre, the Everhart Sisters' House of Horror, and the most systematic murder enterprise in American history. The courtroom, normally adequate for the territorial court's typical caseload of mining disputes and minor criminal matters, proved completely inadequate for the crowds of spectators, reporters, family members of victims, and curiosity seekers who traveled from across the Western Territories and beyond to witness the proceedings. Judge Harrison was forced to move the trial to Carson City's largest available venue, the newly constructed Territorial Opera House, where temporary seating arrangements accommodated nearly 800 observers while maintaining appropriate security and decorum for such serious criminal proceedings. The prosecution team, led by Territorial Attorney General Samuel Morrison, with assistance from federal prosecutors specially assigned to the case, faced the unprecedented challenge of presenting evidence of 97 separate murders while maintaining the jury's attention and ensuring that the systematic nature of the crimes was clearly understood. Morrison, a Harvard-educated lawyer who had previously prosecuted several high-profile criminal cases in California and had served as a military prosecutor during the Civil War, organized the evidence chronologically to demonstrate the evolution of the Sisters' operation from opportunistic crimes to the most sophisticated murder enterprise in American criminal history. The evidence against the Sisters proved overwhelming in both quantity and quality, creating a case that legal scholars would later describe as the most comprehensively documented mass murder prosecution of the 19th century. Rose McGillicuddy's testimony provided crucial eyewitness accounts of the Sisters' suspicious behavior, the basement chambers that had exposed their crimes, and the systematic methods they used to select and eliminate their victims. Her detailed observations, supported by physical evidence she had smuggled out of the Golden Rose, established the foundation for understanding how the Sisters had operated with impunity for nearly 6 years. The physical evidence recovered from the basement chambers included items belonging to each of the 97 documented victims, creating a compelling visual display that filled multiple rooms in the Opera House and provided tangible proof of the scope of the Sisters' crimes. The accounting ledgers maintained by Wilhelmina offered unprecedented insight into the businesslike approach the Sisters had taken to mass murder, with detailed records that enabled prosecutors to establish precise timelines, methods, and profits for each killing. Dr. Hoffman, who had been arrested alongside the Sisters and initially faced charges as an accomplice to murder, agreed to testify against them in exchange for a reduced sentence of life imprisonment rather than execution. His testimony provided horrific details about the methods used to murder their victims, the procedures employed to prevent identification of remains, the network of accomplices that had enabled the Sisters to operate across multiple territories without detection, and the systematic refinement of their killing techniques over nearly 6 years of continuous operation. Hoffman's medical knowledge made his testimony particularly damaging, as he could explain in clinical detail how the Sisters had refined their killing methods over time to maximize efficiency while minimizing evidence that could lead to their detection. His personal journals, introduced as evidence, contained detailed notes about experiments with different poisons, observations about the effectiveness of various mechanical methods of causing death, recommendations for disposing of bodies to prevent identification, and even suggestions for expanding their operation to other territories. The testimony of family members provided the emotional impact necessary to ensure that the jury understood the human cost of the Sisters' crimes and the devastating impact on communities throughout the American West. Diego Fernandez, whose daughter Maria had been among the first documented victims, provided heart-wrenching testimony about his family's futile search for answers and the false hope created by the Sisters' deceptive explanations. His account of traveling from Carson City to Silver Creek, only to be dismissed by corrupt local officials, highlighted the systematic corruption that had enabled the Sisters' operation to continue undetected for so many years. Anna Weber, who had conducted her own investigation into her sister Charlotte's disappearance, testified about the inconsistencies in the Sisters' stories and the obvious lies they had told to explain Charlotte's alleged elopement with a fictional minor. Her methodical approach to questioning Silver Creek residents had revealed the complete absence of evidence supporting the Sisters' claims, demonstrating the sophistication of their deceptive practices and their ability to maintain believable cover stories even when subjected to careful scrutiny. Margaret McGillicuddy, Rose's sister who had received the letters describing her growing suspicions about the Golden Rose, provided testimony that helped establish the timeline of events leading to the investigation. Her decision to contact territorial authorities after receiving Rose's final letter from Carson City had been crucial in initiating the investigation that exposed the sisters' crimes and prevented additional murders. Dozens of other family members provided similar testimony, creating a powerful cumulative impact that demonstrated the scope of the sisters' crimes and the devastation they had inflicted on families and communities throughout the American West. Many of these witnesses had traveled great distances at considerable personal expense to seek justice for their lost daughters, sisters, wives, and mothers. Their presence serving as a powerful reminder of the human cost of the sisters' systematic greed and cruelty. The sisters' defense attorney, Jeremiah Collins, had been appointed by the territorial court due to the complexity of the case and the defendant's lack of financial resources to hire private counsel. Collins, a competent lawyer who had previously handled several capital cases and had served as a military defense attorney during the Civil War, faced the impossible task of defending clients whose guilt was established by overwhelming physical evidence, detailed written records of their crimes, and testimony from dozens of witnesses. Collins attempted to argue that the women had been driven to desperate measures by the harsh conditions of frontier life and their need to protect themselves from dangerous men who might have threatened their safety or livelihood. He suggested that their crimes had begun as acts of self-defense that had gradually escalated due to their increasing desperation, fear of being discovered, and the corrupting influence of easy profits from their initial victims. This argument found little sympathy with the jury, who had heard extensive testimony about the calculated, systematic nature of the murders and the sisters' obvious financial motivations over nearly 6 years of continuous operation. The defense also attempted to argue that the younger sisters had been dominated by Greta and had participated in the crimes only under duress, claiming that the eldest sister's superior intelligence and forceful personality had coerced her siblings into becoming unwilling accomplices in increasingly serious crimes. However, the prosecution's evidence showed that all 4 sisters had been active participants in planning and executing the murders, with each sister's handwriting appearing in the accounting records and witness testimony establishing their individual involvement in selecting, manipulating, and killing their victims. During the trial, investigators presented evidence that the sisters had accumulated extraordinary wealth through their crimes, including cash reserves of nearly $50,000, gold coins and jewelry worth tens of thousands of dollars more, and valuable personal items taken from their victims that represented additional assets worth thousands more. This wealth had been carefully hidden in various locations around Silver Creek, in bank accounts established under false names in Carson City, Sacramento, Denver, and other cities, and in the form of property investments that the sisters had made using their victims' identities and forged documents. The financial evidence demonstrated that the sisters had been planning to eventually abandon their Silver Creek operation and establish themselves elsewhere under assumed identities, using their accumulated wealth to purchase respectability in new locations where their criminal past would be unknown. Their long-term planning and systematic approach to accumulating resources showed that they viewed their murder operation as a temporary means to achieve permanent financial security and social status that would enable them to live as wealthy, respectable women for the rest of their lives. The most compelling testimony came from territorial officials who had investigated similar disappearances in other mining towns and communities throughout Nevada, California, Colorado, Utah, and other Western territories. Their research had revealed a pattern of missing women that corresponded to the sisters' known movements before their arrival in Silver Creek, suggesting that their criminal activities may have begun years earlier and involved additional victims whose deaths had never been properly investigated. These officials testified that they had identified at least 43 additional cases of missing women in communities where the sisters had been present during the relevant time periods, though the evidence was not sufficient to bring formal charges for these earlier crimes. The testimony suggested that the true scope of the sisters' criminal activities may have been even larger than the 97 documented murders, with a total victim count that could have exceeded 140 women over a period of perhaps 8 or 9 years. On November 15, 1876, after deliberating for less than 2 hours, the jury returned guilty verdicts against all 4 sisters for multiple counts of first-degree murder. The speed of their deliberation reflected the overwhelming nature of the evidence and the jury's unanimous conviction that the defendants deserved the maximum punishment available under territorial law. Territorial Judge William Harrison sentenced all 4 women to death by hanging, making them the first multiple female defendants to receive capital punishment in Nevada Territory and creating one of the largest mass executions in American criminal history. The judge's remarks during sentencing reflected both the community's shock and revulsion at the scope of their crimes and the broader implications for American society. Your crimes represent not merely the taking of human life for personal gain, but the most systematic and calculated betrayal of human trust and decency ever documented in American criminal history. Judge Harrison continued, "You have taken advantage of the most vulnerable members of our society, young women seeking honest employment and the opportunity to build better lives for themselves and their families. And you have exploited their desperation and hope for purely selfish gain, showing a complete absence of human compassion, decency, or moral restraint. Your actions have not only ended the lives of 97 innocent women, but have also caused immeasurable pain to their families and communities, damaged the reputation of legitimate businesses that provide employment and shelter to women on the frontier, and undermined the basic trust that must exist between human beings in a civilized society." The judge's sentencing remarks also addressed the broader implications of the case for territorial law enforcement and social policy. "This case has revealed serious deficiencies in our system of law enforcement, our protection of vulnerable populations, and our oversight of business establishments that serve transient populations. The fact that these crimes could continue for nearly 6 years without detection, despite repeated reports from concerned family members and obvious patterns that should have triggered investigations, demonstrates the need for fundamental reforms in how we investigate missing persons cases, how we ensure the integrity of our local officials, and how we protect those who depend on our institutions for safety and justice." The executions took place on January 10, 1877, before a crowd of nearly 5,000 spectators who had traveled from throughout the United States and several foreign countries to witness the end of the Everhart Sisters' reign of terror. The execution site, a specially constructed gallows in Carson City's Courthouse Square, required extensive security arrangements due to the size of the crowd and the intense emotions generated by the case. Contemporary newspaper accounts describe the sisters' final moments in detail that reflects both the public fascination with their crimes and the era's attitudes toward female criminals. All 4 women maintained their composure until the final moments, though their behavior differed markedly in their approach to their impending death. Greta reportedly made a brief statement acknowledging their crimes, but claiming they had been driven to desperation by circumstances beyond their control, including the need to survive in a hostile environment that offered few opportunities for respectable women to earn adequate livings. Wilhelmina remained silent during the final proceedings, though witnesses reported that she appeared to be praying quietly and clutching a small religious medal that had been allowed as her final personal possession. Margot attempted to maintain her characteristic charm even on the gallows, thanking the crowd for their attention and expressing hope that their story would serve as a warning to other young women about the dangers of frontier life. Adelaide, the youngest, broke down completely in her final moments, sobbing and begging for mercy, while claiming she had been coerced by her older sisters into participating in crimes she never would have committed alone. The simultaneous execution of 4 women created an unprecedented spectacle that would be remembered as one of the most significant events in Nevada Territory's history. The crowd's reaction was described as a mixture of satisfaction, horror, and fascination, with many spectators traveling hundreds of miles to witness what newspapers called the end of America's most systematic murder enterprise. The aftermath of the case brought sweeping changes to law enforcement practices throughout Nevada Territory and the broader American West. The revelation that Sheriff Caleb Harrison and several other local officials had been compromised by the sisters' blackmail scheme led to a comprehensive investigation of corruption in frontier law enforcement, resulting in the removal of dozens of officials and the implementation of new oversight procedures designed to prevent similar failures in the future. The territorial government established new protocols for investigating missing persons reports, particularly those involving vulnerable women who might be targets for exploitation. These protocols required local law enforcement agencies to maintain detailed records of missing persons cases, coordinate with territorial authorities when patterns of disappearances were identified, conduct thorough investigations regardless of the victim's social status or ethnicity, and provide regular reports on the status of ongoing investigations to territorial supervisors. The case also led to increased regulation of boarding houses, hotels, and other establishments that provided accommodation to transient populations. New territorial regulations required such businesses to maintain detailed records of their guests and employees, provide regular reports to local authorities about individuals staying at their establishments, submit to periodic inspections to ensure compliance with safety and sanitation standards, and demonstrate legitimate business purposes for any unusual activities or construction projects. The Golden Rose building was demolished within days of the sisters' execution, and the site remained vacant for decades afterward. Local residents reported that the location was considered cursed, though more likely the association with such horrific crimes made it impossible to find tenants or purchasers willing to occupy the space. Silver Creek itself began its decline during the late 1870s as the silver deposits played out, and by 1885, the town had been largely abandoned as residents moved to more promising locations or returned to more established communities. Today, only scattered foundation stones and desert vegetation mark the location where one of the American West's most systematic killing enterprises operated for nearly 6 years. The site has become a destination for historians, criminologists, and researchers interested in frontier crime, though visitors consistently report an atmosphere of unease and sadness that seems to linger more than a century after the tragic events that occurred there. This mystery shows us that the most terrifying criminals in American history were not supernatural monsters or deranged individuals acting on uncontrollable impulses, but ordinary people who made calculated decisions to exploit the vulnerabilities of others for personal gain. The Everhart Sisters' systematic approach to murder, their ability to maintain respectable façades while committing horrific crimes over nearly a decade, and their exploitation of social prejudices and institutional weaknesses of their era, make their case a chilling example of human evil disguised as respectability and community membership. Their story demonstrates how social isolation, economic desperation, corruption, and prejudice can create conditions that enable predators to operate with impunity for extended periods, preying on the most vulnerable members of society while avoiding detection through manipulation of social expectations and systematic corruption of authority figures. The sisters' success in maintaining their operation for nearly 6 years, despite repeated warnings from concerned family members and obvious patterns that should have triggered investigations, illustrates the critical importance of protecting vulnerable populations and maintaining vigilant oversight of institutions and individuals who hold positions of trust and authority. The case also reveals how criminal enterprises can exploit the anonymity and social disruption of rapidly changing communities, using the constant movement of people and the weakness of formal institutions to mask systematic predation. The sisters' operation succeeded because Silver Creek's boomtown environment created conditions where people frequently arrived and departed without extensive documentation, where law enforcement was weak and often corrupt, and where social prejudices made certain victims' disappearances less likely to generate serious investigations. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed about their operation, or might there be additional victims and accomplices who were never discovered? Could similar crimes occur today, or have modern communication systems and law enforcement techniques made such systematic predation impossible? The sisters' ability to maintain detailed business records while treating human lives as commercial transactions raises disturbing questions about how ordinary people can become capable of extraordinary evil when presented with opportunities for profit and convinced that their victims are disposable. Leave your comment below and share your thoughts about how society can better protect vulnerable individuals from those who would exploit their desperation and trust. If you enjoyed this tale of systematic murder on the American frontier and want more horror stories from America's dark past, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysteries that reveal the darker aspects of human nature. See you in the next video.